Welcome to the Culture Review, the place where we do it for the culture on Radio Now 95.3 FM Lagos. On the Culture Review, we give you all of the scoop on Nigerian and Africans' arts and culture. I'm talking movies, music, and also locally made arts and crafts. My name is Imaria Asemuta, and as always, I am here to represent the culture. Today on the show is a very, very special episode. I am going to be having two guests. Yes, a guest on guest episode. A guest on our previous show, Olufisayo Bakare, an art curator who spoke on art curation in Nigeria, is here today as the guest host. And she'll be in conversation with Hannah O'Leary, the director and head of modern and contemporary art at Sotheby's in London. Sotheby's is a British and American founded corporation and one of the world's largest international marketplace for African art and artists. Fisayo and Hannah will be having a conversation on contemporary African art. They will also be talking about the Sotheby's interest in African art and artists, and they will generally just have a conversation about art. Before I talk too much, let me hand over the show to Fisayo Bakare.
That was such an amazing introduction. Hannah, please tell us about your career path and how you have ended up at the world's greatest auction house.
Oh, wow. That's a big question. It's one I'm asked a lot. I'll be honest and say I didn't study African art history. I have a degree in art history. I have a master's. And in the 4 years that I was studying, we really didn't talk about Africa. Maybe occasionally when we spoke about Picasso and some of the European modernists and the influences they would have had, but we never explored modern and contemporary African art history. And that's something I think is a real shame, and I hope will be addressed in the near future because it's still the case. So for me, I graduated in art history. I did an internship for Sotheby's in Ireland, where I'm from, and then I moved to Australia and worked for them there. Then I moved to London because I wanted to be in the capital of the art world where all the action was. And I worked for Bonhams, another auction house, and we started sales of African art there, among many other sales that I was working on. But the African art market started to really take off with these first international sales, and I never looked back. Mm-hmm. So I was there for 10 years. I was the head of contemporary African art there. When Sotheby's came knocking and said, we'd really love you to join us and build that market even further with a bigger company like Sotheby's. So that's where I am today.
That's very interesting. This thing about African art history that is missing in the narrative, how is it that we can go back to fill in the gaps with the art that we do have, the ones that are either being sold or the ones that are being showcased in exhibitions? I feel very attached to this conversation, specifically because I am an African, and quite a bit of that history has been lost on me. So I grew up in Nigeria until I was 7, and I left and came back after my formative years, and all of that blew over. And so the history that would have been taught in secondary school at the level at which I left, I didn't learn about it. It was only through reading and being very intentional about knowing about these people that my forebearers are the ones that came before me. And so how is it that chasm is being filled? Is there a way that, I guess, outside of the auction house in general, with the institutions of learning, how is that being something that is up in the narrative or the conversation?
Yeah, that's such a great question. It's so important, and it's all related to the market as well. The art history doesn't exist in a vacuum, and as these prices build, so will the investment in academia, in publishing, in education is all coming alongside with it, which is really, really exciting. I mean, I took it for granted growing up in the UK and Ireland that we had access to arts education, that we had free museums, that we had the greatest art in the world on our doorstep, and we were encouraged to go to those museums. At the same time, those museums and those galleries boast that they're international galleries, that they're showing us international art, right, that the auction houses are selling international art, that my degree was in international art. And the continent of Africa, by and large, has been left out of that story. And that's just incorrect. And I think that finally the world is opening up to that. And it's not just about Africa, it's about the global south in general. I think many of my peers and colleagues from Oceania, from Latin America, would agree that there are huge regions of the world that have been left out of the discussion. And I'm going to bring the market back into it as well.
Yes.
You know, what's changing is the buyers and the buying power. You know, the most powerful buyers at Sotheby's right now are Asian clients. And there's no doubt to think that in future that could be our African clients as well. And they're going to dictate what we value, what we read about, what we see in our museums. And that's really exciting.
That's quite a powerful cultural dialogue, because China has kind of taken over manufacturing as well, right? So everything is made in China.
But if you look at the Chinese art market, contemporary Asian art only started being promoted in the early 2000s. It was only 20 years ago. And that market kind of grew and grew. It's very similar to what we're seeing with African art at the moment. And like I say, today, I think we just published our mid-year results, and I think they said about a third of our buyers at Sotheby's, with regards to value, are in Asia.
Wow.
Yeah. So American buyers, European buyers are no longer the most powerful people in the art world.
Wow, that's something to chew on. It's my understanding that art is categorized, or the genres of art are categorized by their stylization. So, for example, Cubism, it's kind of like a broken contortment of figures and forms. Futurism it speaks of speed. Surrealism is the unknown realm and the intangible realm. Is there a unifier that identifies African art?
Another question I get asked a lot. I think African art is a bit of a misnomer. It's a way to, to my earlier point, it's a way of giving a platform to a whole region that had been overlooked by and large. Not locally. I'll always advocate for those local markets on the ground in Africa, but I'm talking from an international standpoint. I think it's such a broad continent. We're talking about 54 different countries. We're talking about a large and very varied 100 years of art history. I think it's very hard to categorise African art in any kind of meaningful way apart from those geographical boundaries. I don't think you could say that Moroccan art and South African art has much to do with each other.
Right, yeah.
But within that, there are so many varied and exciting art histories to be told, and different schools and different movements. Much like you're talking about Cubism and Surrealism, you also have similar movements, contemporary movements on the continent as well.
I know that globalization has played a huge role in the representation of art, but by and large, African art usually, the sculptural aspect of African art usually uses recycled materials. How has globalization shifted that from the output on the continent?
Okay. Sculpture, Africa and particularly West Africa has such a rich history in sculptural production, and it's also where we find the very beginnings of, actually it's where modern art in the West comes from, is African sculpture. And when that was discovered and exhibited in the West, that's when European modernism really begins.
Right.
And when you talk about recycled materials, I think there's a great culture in Africa of using and reusing materials that are to hand, right? And so the idea that you have to import expensive oil paints and canvases and things isn't always practical. Elan Sui, the great Ghanaian artist who's based here in Nigeria, often talks about this. You know, when he was starting out his career in the 1970s, he was trained in painting, but he couldn't get his hands on the material. So he looked around him and thought, what can I use? There's a plentiful supply of wood here, wonderful tropical hardwoods here. Right. I'm going to use those and create great artworks, great paintings with those instead. And then he did the same 20 years later. He found those bottle caps that had been discarded and he thought there's something in this. And it took him a couple of years to hit on this idea of crushing them and making these beautiful tapestries out of them. And now they're world famous.
Yes.
So I don't know about, often it's understood as a criticism of the West and that influence and influx of waste and that culture on Africa, which is often has that political standpoint as well. But I think it also comes from that history of just use and reuse and recycling that is embedded in culture here, that maybe we have such a throwaway culture in the West.
Right. Right. At the moment, the Sotheby's is conducting free appraisals for their upcoming contemporary African art auction in Lagos and Accra. How has the response been like? Have you began the appraisals yet?
Yes, the response has been fantastic. You know, I wish I could spend so much more time here. Every time I come, I run out of time, and I think next time I'm staying for longer.
Right.
Maybe I need to live here. So today I've been on the move since 8 a.m. and I think my final appointment is at 10 p.m.
Wow.
The response has been great. You know, the sales that we have in London at Sotheby's have been transformative. We've really taken the market to places that we hadn't seen before. And we're seeing a really huge international demand from art from this region. And so that's exciting. People want to be part of that. People need to sell for all sorts of reasons. There's such a treasure trove here. So this is my first overseas trip since March 2020, I was also in Nigeria. That was the last place I went to. It was the first. I knew it would be the first place I come back to. It is the most exciting place for me on the continent. And there, I learn so much every time I come here, and every time I speak to collectors, I further my education. To our earlier point about not having a background in African art history, I learn from the collectors, I learn from the artists, I learn from being here. So that's really, really exciting. And today I've discovered more works. I mean, we've spent 18 months in lockdown, and it's been great to have the technology that we can do appraisals online. We can have FaceTime with people. We can do that virtually, and it's been very effective, but nothing beats being in front of the paintings.
I completely agree. And to speak to the spirit of the city of Lagos, specifically in Nigeria, I think there's something magnetic about it that causes you to want to always come back, or leaves a nostalgic feeling for you to actually come back and revisit the city. So we'll be more than happy for you to take up shop or to find residence in Lagos. You're more than welcome to do that.
Thank you.
Right, so there's a West African focus. I know that there are different, you had mentioned Morocco earlier. I know there's the Zeit Mocha in South Africa. Are there any other appraisals that are going to happen over the course or over the continent toward the African art auction that is coming up? Or is it specific to the West African production and art objects?
Well, I wish I could get everywhere. As you all know, the landscape at the moment for travel is really restrictive. So a lot of our appraisals still are online. And actually, we find a lot of art outside the continent as well. Sometimes the most exciting discoveries are pieces that might have left 50 or 60 years ago. In the past, we've done appraisals all over. I mean, we go to South Africa regularly, Nigeria regularly. But we also go to Morocco, Ghana. We're seeing more and more interesting pieces coming out of places like Ethiopia, Uganda, Tanzania. I wish I could get to every single African country. I don't quite have the hours in the day to do so.
Right.
But as this market grows, yes, I think you'll be seeing us in more and more countries as time goes on.
The deaths of Bisi Silva and Okwi Ewenzo, and more recently, Professor Yusuf Grillo, have left cavities in the presentation and curation of African contemporary art. As a curator, I believe that they have almost left a chasm that can't be filled. How is Sotheby's helping to fill this gap? And I'm talking more from an institutionalized point of view, because art is still quite in an emerging scene in Nigeria, and the institutionalization of that art, right, from the curator's point of view, or the ecology of art production in general, is still quite weak. How is an established institution like Sotheby's assisting with strengthening the budding curators and possibly established ones? I don't know that there are that many on the continent or in Nigeria anymore. I might be a little ignorant to that.
Yeah, I think, BC and Okwi, losing both of those behemoths within weeks of each other was devastating. I think for all of us, they had been so supportive in the work that we all do in the African art ecosystem. I would disagree with your comment, though, about them leaving a chasm, because I think they built an amazing foundation. Both of them were great mentors. I feel like they personally mentored me. I know hundreds of people who would say the same thing. I think BC's left behind an amazing legacy in the work that she's done in establishing CCA Lagos. And so to your question, the first very practical thing that we want to do at Sotheby's is support the work that CCA Lagos are doing. We want to support them with a fundraising auction, which we hope is going to take place this year. We need artist support, we need buyer support, but that's going to see the long-term legacy of BC fulfilled. And as you know, she managed an artist training program, a curatorial program, the library, the research program. All of that is so key in building the next generation of curators. Okwi as well, if BC was that kind of beacon on the continent, Okwi was the kind of spokesperson for African art internationally. Similarly, if you look at some of his mentors who are doing great things at the moment, you've got people like Osai Bonsu, who's leading the efforts at Tate Modern or Tate International in London. He's heading up the African Acquisitions Committee. You've got people like Dr. Smooth in MoMA. You've got all of these key people who are from the continent, who are now at major institutions worldwide, who are making sure that African art is seen, Africa is on the global art map. I hope that we're doing our part at Sotheby's as well. In the marketplace, we're certainly encouraging people to apply for our internship program. We've got the Sotheby's Institute, where I see amazing people coming through and then going on to do great things in the African art world. So like I say, I think yes, it was a small pool of people who were beating that drum, but actually they're leaving behind so many more people. They were, as someone described it to me, that old cliche that we're all standing on their shoulders. Absolutely.
It's communal effort in Africa. It takes a village, is what we.
I like that. Well. I like that. That applies.
Yes, the world is fast becoming virtual. And the advent of NFTs, non-fungible tokens for those that are listening, how has that caused a disruption in the global auction market? And what is your take on this?
Well, I'm not an expert on NFTs, but I will say that's probably the most talked about subject in the art world in 2021. We have a whole program of NFT sales at Sotheby's. We have a dedicated department that hosts those sales. And what's exciting to us as a company is not just that we're dealing with a new art form, but actually a whole new canon of artists and a whole new body of collectors. So we're seeing digital art as an art form in its own right. It's not just about painters or sculptors making NFTs. We're finding these new talented artists who are working in the digital medium finally getting a place for their work to be seen and to be collected as well. And the collectors of NFTs aren't your typical art buyers. They're looking for something different. They come from different backgrounds. And hopefully we're going to see a little bit of crossover. So those people who are in that very niche field previously of NFT collecting, as it goes mainstream, hopefully they'll be more integrated into the art world, and vice versa. Those of us in the old school art world
we want to go more digital.
We're going to have to look at this. NFTs are here to stay, and beyond the art form, the NFTs, the blockchain technology has amazing applications for the art world, and especially not just especially, but also for the African art world. Things like authentication, ownership. All of these pieces, all of those elements can be verified by blockchain technology. And that's really exciting.
We have some museums in Lagos. I don't want to say the entire nation because I don't know the entire nation. I know Lagos a little more particularly because I've lived here the longest. We have museums, and we have some that are coming up and that are teaching or touching on specific cultures. Like there's a Yoruba museum coming up on Lagos Island. There is the established National Museum, which is, it needs some level of upgrade. But then there's also a museum that is spoken of in Benin that is supposed to be under construction, or maybe they're doing the design work right now for it. I don't believe that we have the technology for preserving these works, and so what you would see is a lot more of our relics are in stores, because I've spoken with the director of the National Museum in Onikon, which is on Lagos Island, and they do send or lend some of the art objects to the British Museum, for example. But then the preservation of these things is also something that is very lacking in the art education in Nigeria. Is there any intentional thing that Sotheby's, aside from the institutes that you had mentioned, the institution, the education institution, is that correct? You had said
Sotheby's Institute.
The Institute, right. And then there's some internships that you have as well.
Yeah.
Is there something that the West is doing to help? So I use Sotheby's and the West kind of interchangeably in this dialogue for the purpose of the conversation, but is there anything that they're doing to assist with that preservation? Because, there's standards for museums, especially when it comes to the preservation of the art. I went to the Yamisi Shillong Museum of Art, and there's some pieces that are not so well taken care of.
Yeah.
And I don't know that there's anything that we can do to kind of redeem the past glory, but to kind of preserve that is also important. Because if a collector, for example, had something that wasn't stored properly, the material will start disintegrating and it gets devalued. So what else? Because it helps Sotheby's in the event that a private collector wanted to kind of auction off one of their pieces in their collection. What ways is that ecosystem being strengthened in the longevity of the preservation of African art?
Right. Well, again, this is related to the marketplace. As pieces are more valuable, there is a reason to hold on to them, to preserve them, and to spend money on their preservation as well, because that's a whole art form in its own right, conservation and preservation. And it's something, as you've already mentioned, there weren't that many institutions here in Lagos. Thankfully, there are more being built, but preservation is going to be a huge part of their role in caretaking of those pieces. We work with conservators in London and in other parts of the world who are very familiar with African artworks, who are able to conserve them. Most pieces some treatment can be made to either restore them to their former glory or certainly to stop the deterioration. You can imagine in a city like Lagos, it's hot and humid, that I see a lot of different pieces in different conditions. Mold and mildew can be a big problem.
Right.
And so education on how to store an artwork, how to look after an artwork is key, and that's something we certainly give at Sotheby's. We can guide people when it comes to how to frame something correctly, how to make sure an artwork on paper is in the correct mount, with the correct glass that might preserve it from UV rays, hanging it in the right place, not too close to sources of damp, sources of heat, that kind of thing. We definitely advise our clients on that if they need it. But again, as these pieces become more expensive, as the market takes off, as the world is looking to buy African art, and those art buyers, especially if we're talking about pieces that might be in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, they're going to expect them to be in perfect condition.
Right, yes.
And so artists and curators and the people on the ground are going to have to be invested in that as well. And there'll be opportunities for conservators to set up practice here. That'll be lucrative business. I think it would be today if someone was interested in taking on that training, to set up studio here.
I think it's definitely a chasm that would need to be filled, and with Nigerians, kind of the youthful Nigerians being more so out of a job now because of the advent of the pandemic, right? Even beforehand, there was something that the president has said about lazy youth and how we are generally kind of just sitting and not really wanting to work. And I think these opportunities make for unique contributions in the art ecology and the ecosystem. Let us talk about the repatriations and the Benin Bronzes. We hear news that there are some bronzes that are coming back to the continent of Africa. And Nigeria specifically it didn't exist at the time that these objects were being removed or extracted. And now there's a disparity between where they're going to go. And this is kind of just an opinion piece. I don't really expect that. I mean, it's a Nigeria problem, right? Or it's a Western to Nigeria agreement of sorts. Where do you believe that these art objects should go? Should they go back to the royal courts where they were extracted from ideally? Should they go into museums so more people can see it, more Nigerians can see it? Or should they be the responsibility of the federal government to to figure out where they're supposed to be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have to caveat this by saying I'm not an expert in this field at all. I'm an expert in contemporary African art. My personal belief is that certainly the pieces should be repatriated. They were removed illegally and they should be back in this country. I think what's exciting, all of those problems are very valid problems. I wish I had the resolution. I think everyone would be shocked if I was the one who had the answer.
Right, yes.
But what's exciting is that the conversation is being had, right? I feel like for so long this conversation wasn't even on the table. You know, Nigeria was asking for the pieces back, the Oba's Palace were asking for the pieces back, and the British and the Europeans just weren't listening. There's nowhere for us to send them. They'll be lost, they'll be stolen, they'll be destroyed, they'll rot, whatever.
Right, yeah.
And now everything has changed. I think most people in the West understand the reason that they should be repatriated, understand that maybe they were taken not in a rightful manner, and that there may be a way to resolve this that might even keep everyone happy to a degree. My understanding is that the Oba's Palace see those bronzes as their greatest a signifier of culture, and that they are quite happy for the world to see them and to understand that this was the cradle of great civilization. So they want pieces to remain in Europe, but they want key pieces to come back. I think the idea behind the Edo State Museum was that they would build this home that would be worthy of their repatriation, so that those governments would see that repatriating those works is a viable option. And I think that the issue there is the cultural differences, right? We just assume in the West that the federal government are the ones that we should be in conversation with.
Right, yeah.
You understand here in Nigeria that the rightful owners are the Oba, and his royal house. Exactly. What's exciting is that this panel has been put together where we have representation from the federal government, from the state government, and from the Oba's Palace, and hopefully those talks will continue so that they are the ones who can be the decision makers, and they can be the ones that decide where they go to. I think that this museum, if it's done in the right way, correctly, and with every sensitivity to local cultural practice, could be one of the greatest museums in the world and could attract visitors and tourism and authors and researchers from all over the world. And that's exciting.
I agree. On a lighter note, as we round off, can you tell us some of your favorite Nigerian artists and why?
Oh, how long do you have?
Let's do top 5.
Oh my God, I really don't know if I can limit it to 5. I'm going to start with the great loss that we had on Monday, Yusuf Grillo. What an amazing gentleman and genius. One of the greatest modernists this country produced. His passing is such a devastating loss on the art community, and I think we're only it'll take a while to process that. I'm going to name the big one, Menemomu, who's one of the artists with whom I credit my entire career.
Wow.
I remember when I first accepted one of his works for sale at Bonham's, and my boss told me I didn't know what I was doing and it wasn't worth anything.
Wow.
And that was a long time ago. That must have been in 2007 or so. And I think, it had an estimate of about £500 and it made about £30,000. And we thought, okay, there's something here. We should explore this market, right? Others, let me think of some contemporary artists. Nengi Umoko,
She's showing actually at the exhibition, upcoming one.
Right, exactly. So we should give a shout out to
Hi, Nengi.
to Nengi, but also to the exhibition that's opening this weekend at the Shillong Museum.
Yes, so it's called The Invincible Hand, and we're showcasing 40 female artists and just about 70 works, ranging from tapestry to fine art, sculpture, and it's quite exciting. It's quite exciting to be at the forefront of the championing the voices of women. They're all very different, but what is most common among these pieces is the technique and the time that they have taken to kind of produce these art forms. And so it's a celebration of the Nigerian women who are often, women are often marginalized from the conversation because it's largely a patriarchal platform or society that, you know, art is being produced in. And so to extract 40 names over the course of about 8 months has been quite an eye-opener, and I want the entire world to see it. But by virtue of us being here, I definitely want as many Nigerians or Lagosians to go out and see it, because it's definitely a history piece, and I think this is a historic moment as well. In a few years from now, I believe that the works of these women will be studied, because it takes a historic lens as well. It starts from the history, the art history that is missing in our education, and it tries to bring it to more modern and contemporary terms. So it's quite interesting. But yes, Nengi is showing. 3 of her pieces are showing, so it's quite interesting.
I'm so pleased that you're working on that show, because I agree, I think it's going to be historic. And in honour of that, I'm going to finish my list with female artists, because most of the artists that I love and adore and collect in for my own collection tend to be female.
Okay.
So apart from Nengi, I would rate people like Madupe Faduba, someone I consider a personal friend. She is so talented. She showed me her new work last week, and I cannot wait for the world to see it. It's been 3 years since her last exhibition,
yes.
and I think she's included in that show
She
as
is.
well.
She's showing.
So definitely go and check that out. And then finally, I'm going to end on actually the highest selling Nigerian artist of all time, Njideka Akunyili Crosby, who is so young and so talented. She's from Enugu. She lives in Los Angeles, and her work really speaks of that immigrant experience, the African immigration experience in America, being African American, being an African abroad, being an African away from home.
Right.
Her work has so many layers. It's so intense. It's so personal. I just adore her. She's still in her 30s. She has such a huge career ahead of her. And her work, I mean, we've sold her work at Sotheby's for, I think the top price was about $3.5 million. So almost 3 times the price of Benin Bronzes, which is surprising. And I hope we can, I hope there'll be a little bit of, what's the word? Leapfrogging, that we'll see that record broken over and over again. And I'm sure we're going to see that record broken over and over again, because Nigeria boasts so many world-class talented artists that should be up there with their international contemporaries, and should be making 7 figures as standard, right?
right, standard, yes.
So, I mean, Njideka is really leading the way in that respect, but I think she would also agree that there are so many of her contemporaries that deserve to be up there with her.
I agree. I definitely want to thank you for your time today. I know it's a labor of love, because you're on your way to Accra. On your way to Accra as well in a few days. And I really just want to thank you for your time and your contribution to the narrative, the African art, the contemporary African art narrative. It's been a pleasure speaking with you and meeting you in person for the first time, and I hope that our paths will cross in the nearest future again, when we sit at, I believe, a round table or at an auction house and have a more in-depth conversation as to how the market is thriving.
Oh, thank you so much. I've so enjoyed our conversation. I'm honoured to be here. I hope everyone understands how much an interest, even if it's not an investment in contemporary art, can be so rewarding. I would also invite everyone, when they're next in London, if they're ever in London, to please come into Sotheby's. We're open every day of the week. There's usually the most amazing art exhibition in there. We have our African art sales twice a year, but we also have contemporary art from around the world almost all year round. So those exhibitions are always free and open to the public, and we would love to see people there.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
A big thank you to Fisayo and Hannah there. What a lovely conversation on African and Nigerian art. Nigeria is a beautiful place with a lot of talented people. Well, we've come to the end of the show today, and remember to tune in next week for another episode of the Culture Review. Don't forget to subscribe and also click the notification bell. Wear your mask, wash your hands, sanitize, and protect yourself. My name is Imaria Asemota, and you're still listening to Radio Now 95.3 FM Lagos.